All right, welcome everybody to the start of a new series of videos that I'm doing for the Psych of RPGs. This one is going to be focused on learning. So over the course of a few videos, what I want to do is I want to explore what we know about learning from a psychological perspective and see how we can use that in our tabletop role-playing game space. And I want to start the series with an absolutely wonderful guest here that I have. They have been killing it this last year. I think most folks know Chris from the explosive success that was The Wretched. But honestly, Chris, it feels like you've been 1 month after another, ever since you got your Patreon going, have just been releasing just unbelievably awesome things. So I've got Chris Bissette with me today. Welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for chatting
Hi.
with me. Could you introduce yourself to folks?
Yeah, I'm Chris Bissette. I'm the designer of The Wretched and many other games that you won't have heard of. And I am extremely online on twitter.com at Pangalactic. Probably see me shouting about stuff on there as well.
I was recently listening to your interview with on for TPK roleplay for the Top Shelf,
Mhm.
and I think you used that same phrase of "I'm extremely online" with
Yeah,
your Twitter presence, and that feels very, very good as a descriptor for
yeah.
you.
I'm less online than I used to be, but I just it's a habit I can't kick.
Yeah, I've been on Twitter now for the 1 year. This month marks my 1 year, and I was like, wow, I made it to 6,000 tweets. And then I look at some other people's, and I'm like, I'm a little baby. I'm
Yeah, I've been on Twitter for over a decade, which is disgusting, really.
Wow. Nice, nice.
I
Well,
remember when retweets didn't exist. That's weird.
oh my God, I can't even imagine.
It was
Uh,
so much quieter, Spencer.
well, I didn't bring you here to go down memory lane of Twitter, although I do have lots of questions about like Twitter 10 years ago. We'll save that for later. I brought you here because you recently released a quick start document for an upcoming game that you're releasing called Dice Souls. And
Yeah.
quick starts are they're not like a new thing. It's not like, oh my God, what is this quick start thing? We've seen them for a long time. Lots of games have like introductory characters or adventures or pre-gens and things like that. But yours in particular really jumped out to me as sort of like spectacular for a lot of
Oh,
reasons.
thanks.
And I'm gonna gush about it throughout this little talk here. But
I'm
before
okay
I
with that.
okay, good. Before I talk about why I love it so much, could you just give me like a little bit of a rundown of like the experience of creating it? Like, how did you decide to sort of go with the structure that you did? Because I think it's pretty special and different than a lot of other quick starts. So, like maybe what references or how did you sort of outline it in the first place?
Yeah. It was the hardest thing I've ever written in my life. People who write quick starts regularly, I don't know how they do it. But the way I approached it, because the game is based on Dark Souls, so I'm trying to emulate a video game experience anyway. And even though Dark Souls is notorious for not teaching you anything and just making you kind of bumble through it, um, I really wanted the quick start for Dice Souls to feel like a tutorial level in a video game, and to teach you the mechanisms and the procedures of the game by having you actually do them. Because I don't learn personally, I can't learn things by reading. When I try and read a new game, it's very rare that I have a sense of how it's going to play.
Hmm.
I learn games by playing, and so I wanted the Dice Souls quick start because the game functions around this core loop of procedurally generating the world. Um, and so basically, the quick start had to show you how to do that and explain what everything is trying to achieve. And I thought the best way of doing that would to just be to guide you through it, introducing mechanics kind of one at a time as and when they're needed, until it kind of at the end of the quick start says, okay, you know everything now. Here's, go and finish your game. Um, and honestly, part of writing it was a process for me of going, cool, I've got this vague idea of how the game plays, but I haven't actually played it yet. So let's play the game. And then basically the quick start is for a large part of it is like one long example of play, but that you engage with. I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question well or not.
No, it absolutely does. And two things really jumped out at me. First of all, when you started by saying it's the hardest thing you've ever written, that immediately resonated with me because I then looked back. I've only made one quick start before, and it was for Slayers. And really, the
Mhm.
quick start is me just copy and pasting what I think are the most important pages from the rule book into a very small PDF compared to like the longer full game. So
Yeah.
that's not really a quick start. It's just like a demo or diet version of the game. And I sat down and just started to even think about what it would look like to write out a quick start using sort of the framework that you did. And I was like, this is not easy to do at all. This is harder than writing the game itself. Um, and I also then had the idea of who can I hire to do this? Like there's got to be somebody who can just specialize in writing quick starts at this point. And the other thing you mentioned, I'm glad you did because it was what I wanted to bring up next. Is that it feels like a video game tutorial. Like you captured that so perfectly because obviously the game is inspired by a video game, and so you've got that as a reference point. Adam Bell, when I was talking to him about this, he mentioned that the game or the quick start has real Mario World 1-1 vibes. Like
Yeah.
you're getting introduced to things one at a time.
That
Sort
was
of
a
this
big
drip
touchstone
feed.
for me.
And so yeah, I was curious, were there like obviously there's Dark Souls, the
Mhm.
game itself, which I know you've been sort of recently replaying. But were there other video game tutorials that you kind of thought about or that are touchstones for you that you're like, this game nailed it in terms of this drip feed of rules and mechanics?
Yeah, Mario 1-1 is definitely a touchstone, and the first level of Mega Man is, like, one of the most perfect tutorial levels ever made, and E1M1 from Doom, the first level of Doom, um, because that's a level, it's you know, like, the Mario levels, they feel like a tutorial. You get that a lot in platformers where it's like, you run sideways, and then you get to a block, and it's like, now you press A to jump, and you jump over a block, and then you get to 2 blocks, and the first level of original Doom teaches you how to play the game in a way that doesn't feel like a tutorial. Like
Mm.
you head down a corridor and there's an enemy there, and you give them plenty of time to spot it, and you fight it, and then you head a little further on, and now there's a couple of enemies, and maybe you're surprised by them, and it just very slowly introduces all the elements of the game in terms of like how enemies are going to act, how you're expected to explore the space, how you're expected to interact with the level in a very organic way. Um, and so that's something that I referenced like mentally. I didn't physically go back and look at it, but it's something I had in my head.
Mm.
And the what's it called? Is it the Eagle Dungeon from Legend of Zelda? The first dungeon from the first Zelda, which is a very much a tutorial
Oh, all the way
where
back original Zelda.
yeah,
Yeah.
where it teaches you about exploring the world. Like you go in and you've got the two different paths, and it slowly introduces enemies. Um, and you do a little bit of backtracking to make your life a little bit easier. Yeah, just basically all these first levels from games that were very formative to me as a kid, butting up against the fact that it's taken me 8 years to be able to get into Dark Souls because it doesn't have a tutorial level, and I've beat my head against it so often. And so I wanted to emulate some of the frustration of playing Dark Souls in like dying and retrying things again, but I absolutely didn't want to emulate how hard it is to figure out how the game works in the first place. I wanted people to just be able to pick up the game and play it. And it's designed as a zero prep game as well. And so one of the concerns was if the game itself is zero prep, the quick start has to be like just play the game, like emphasis on the word quick. And so that was something that I tried to do with it as well.
It's it's interesting because exactly like you said, you're sort of doing this drip feed of mechanics. It's one thing at a time. You run up to the first block and you're like, I have to jump over this. So now I've learned how to jump. Um, and so we were you had mentioned this to me earlier before we started recording, this idea of how we sequence our rule books or things like that.
Mhm.
How do we order things? And the order in which we present the information is going to be really important in the learning experience. And in in a complete game, there's like always the age old debate of what comes first? Do you give the whole, like the core rules first and then character creation rules so that you can make a character based off of knowing the rules? Or do you do a character first because that's the most fun and you want to build your character and then you're engaged and then you learn the rules and then you think, is my character good for these rules or not?
Yeah.
So I'm curious because you just said that you had some thoughts about sequencing in general, and then it also just reminds me of in video games where we usually, if there is character creation, we make the character before we play the game, so we don't necessarily know if we've made a good character or not.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious what you were thinking about when it comes to sequencing rules in an RPG and how we the order in which we put information and maybe the how much information we give at a time and everything like that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like I don't think there is a right answer for it. I think it depends on the game because and it's one of those things where you know it's good when you see it and you know it's bad
Mm,
when you see it, but it's often hard to kind of express why that is. Um and yeah, like lots of people advocate for character creation before everything else, but then like you said, sometimes you sit there making a character being like, I don't understand how this character interacts with the rules. I don't understand what these choices I'm making are and why they're significant. Um, that's not something that's been important for Dice Souls because character creation is literally a case of like give yourself a name,
mm,
pick a weapon, pick one of these four classes that are very, very like there are two sentence description and one ability, and that's all they do to interact mechanically. So I can put that right at the beginning of the game. And because it's a story game where you're creating the world yourself as you play, I don't need to front load a lot of lore because there's only like one page of this is the world, this is your place in it, go and kill stuff.
mm,
So that's quite easy. But what I've been butting up against today is like the quick start explains things in a very drip fed manner. Like, here is an enemy, here is how you fight the enemy, here is how you move to a new area, here's how you populate a new area, etc. But I didn't want to. There's no point just replicating that in the rule book because then you basically put in a quick start in the front of the rule book and then following it with all the rules, which is redundant.
mm.
Um, so the issue I've been putting up with is like, okay, I need to explain what a campsite is. I need to explain what you do at a campsite. I need to explain what areas and regions are and how you generate them. I need to explain what enemies are. And then I need to explain like how you flesh out the story of this world in terms of lore questions and this, that, and the other. And just even though it's a very rules light game, just figuring out the order that I need to present that information in has been really tough because I sort of followed the quick start where I've gone from like I don't know how to express what I'm trying to say. I've tried to do it in a very logical fashion, but then I come to doing like explaining an enemy and I think, oh wait, I haven't explained this other thing that you need to understand what you're reading here, but you need to understand this to understand that. There's a lot of like all the rules and mechanisms feed into each other, and it's very hard to know what's more important to explain first.
Totally. Like if it, I've felt that same experience with some of my games as well, where I'm like, now is the time to mention this thing, but they kind of need to understand this context to truly understand it. So do I give them
Mm.
the context first and then, because that feels like then we run into redundancies, but then we also run into contextless explanation of rules. Like if I could actually put my rules onto like a cork board and connect them with strings, it would be this wild web, right?
Yeah,
And it wouldn't be a sequential line of like here's the logical way of learning things. There would be all these strange loops, and it's a puzzle to figure out,
yeah,
right?
it
Of
really
how
is.
how to put that together.
Like I'm almost at the stage where I'm thinking I'm just going to put at the very beginning of the rule book like here's the basics, here's how you make a character, go play the quick start and then come back. I think might be the best way to do it.
I actually think that's a great idea because exactly like you said, many people learn best by engaging with the material rather than
Mhm.
simply just trying to read and retain it. And so you just throw people into the deep end essentially and be like, just go play it. And
Yeah.
even if and scrub that character, you know, don't keep that character. If you play that and you're like, wow, I actually didn't want to be a priest, great, now you can go back and read the rules and
Yeah,
start over. But I think that's a clever way of kind of getting or solving this puzzle here.
I hope so, because I think now that I've said that, that's probably what I'm gonna do.
Oh, okay, good. We heard it here first on Psych of RPGs. This is how Chris is going to be formatting Dice Souls. Um, I had a question about the quick start in terms of the rules written in the quick start versus the core rules. And when you were
Mhm.
writing the quick start, how much of the core rules did you have done? Was it one of those things where you basically had like core mechanics and the book was also done, or you had like a sense of where you wanted to go, you made a quick start, and now you can build that into a full book?
It's a little bit of both. I had the core mechanic of you have a die pool, you roll it, you're counting failures, and you try not to roll failures. And I had the sense of what upgrades you're going to buy, and I had the procedures in my head for how the levels, the areas, and regions are going to be generated. In terms of things like increasing the map score and rolling on a table to pick an area. Um, but there were a lot of gaps in that, which I'm now filling in as I write the full game. Um, and some things in the quick start I've actually simplified, not simplified, but for example, in the quick start, the core mechanic is that you start with 2d6, you roll them. If you roll a 1 or a 2, that's a failure. And I think in the core rules, I'm actually going to start it with 1, 2, and 3 are failures. Um, because I want it to be a bit of a grind at first, and I want you to start trying to save up those soul dice and buying upgrades. Um, but in the quick start, I think if you went into it and just couldn't do anything initially, or found it very, very hard to defeat enemies, I think you'd probably bounce off it. Whereas I think upping the difficulty a little bit for the full game off the back of the quick start hopefully gives it a bit more longevity in terms of how long people are going to play it for. I don't know. It could be a terrible decision. I might be releasing a patch for it in a month saying, actually, just do 1 or 2 as failures. I don't know. Um, and then, yeah, I've basically been working back and forth. When I was writing the quick start, I was working back and forth between it and the main rules in terms of like, I wrote everything and then I thought, well, shit, now I need to write some areas. So I figured out like an ideal progression, like a 5-room dungeon basically for the quick start. And I wrote those areas. And then I went back to the main document and fleshed out the rest of that region. And now I'm fleshing out the other 5 regions that are going to be in the game that aren't in the quick start. And I've actually gone back to the main rule book off the back of having written the quick start and like changed things, changed the way I've explained things or worded things based on how I worded them in the quick start. It's been like having an editor a little bit doing the quick start because it's allowed me to take things out of the main rulebook document and say, oh, actually, I can explain this better. And because people are going to be reading this as they play it rather than reading it to learn how to play it. Does that make sense? People are going to use the quick start as an at the table document, whereas a rulebook might be a I sit and read this before I play document. And having to explain things in the quick start in terms of you're doing this now, so here's what you need to know, has really helped me like tighten up the rules in the main document as well. So that's been really useful.
Absolutely. It's kind of a cool idea to think about it as almost having your own editor that is yourself, because
Yeah.
as you have to write a quick start, it has to be extremely clear, and it's very, you know, like you said, it's very instructional in this sort of step-by-step sort of approach. And so you want to make sure your instructions are clear, but also if they're reading it and playing it, you don't want it to be too wordy, because nobody wants
Yeah.
to sit there and read a page before they get right back to rolling the dice. So it is that's a really good point. It is like you're editing yourself as you try and think about it in this quick start format. The last question I had for you is not specific to Dice Souls, but just more on this topic of learning and RPGs, and I guess specifically learning RPGs. A lot of people say that the biggest barrier they have to introducing people to new games, so getting away from the dragon game, for example, is
Yeah.
learning new rules.
Hmm.
Like a lot of people are hesitant to learn new rules for a huge variety of reasons. And even some folks are just hesitant to be introduced to the hobby in general because of this barrier of learning about what role playing even is. I've had to, like, explain to my partner what I mean by role playing, not even in the sense of like a context of a specific game, but just like what it means to like do make believe, to like when I teach my Psych of RPGs class to my students, I start off by telling them you're going to have to pretend to be a wizard for 4 hours, and a lot of them look at me very confused. And so, how have you had sort of similar experiences with this idea of folks having a maybe a hesitancy to learning, or some of these barriers? Or do you have any kind of just advice about what we can do about these barriers of learning new rules, and how this is preventing some people from entering the hobby in the first place, or sort of adding a little bit of variety to their experience in the hobby?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert by any means. I know, like, I've tried to introduce my partner to role playing games, um, and she isn't interested in like the dragon game or the
Mhm.
trappings of like epic fantasy. And she had those same barriers where she was like, the first time we tried to play a game, she was sort of like, I don't know what I'm meant to do. I don't know what the boundaries are. The way the most successful way I've encountered of explaining the concept of playing a role playing game to people is that, when we were kids, we all played games of make believe with each other. Um, and there would always be some kind of conflict there that always ended in a fight because someone was like, "Oh, bang, I shot you," and then someone else is like, "No, you didn't. I've got my super magic power armor, or I turned invisible. You can't see me." And we're doing that, but then when we reach a point where the outcome is unsure, or we might not know how to resolve something, that's when we turn to the mechanics of the game, and we use dice as a tool to keep the story moving without butting heads against each other, basically. Um, because I think everyone's had that experience of playing a game and reaching an impasse and arguing with their friends about it when they were 8 years old.
I love
Um,
that analogy. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, it's fine. It's
I
fine.
think that's so perfect to think about. Like, everybody has absolutely had an experience like that as kids, and so
Yeah,
yeah, we just, if only we had some dice in our hands when we were kids, this
exactly.
all would have
Like,
been fine.
storytelling and play are things that everybody shares. Like, it's a stories and oral storytelling go back to the dawn of humanity and intelligence, right? It's one of our oldest traditions is story and play. And all we're doing with role-playing games, they are an invitation to play, and they are both a toolbox for how to play in a specific way and how to tell specific kinds of stories, and they are a set of, what's the word I'm looking for? Imagination kickstart tools,
Yeah.
things to give you ideas that you wouldn't come up with on your own, and to be able to tell stories that you maybe wouldn't come up with yourself. Um, I can't even remember what the actual question you asked me was now.
No, I think you spoke to it. It was just generally like experiences with folks having issues learning our, role playing games, or
Mhm.
understanding what it is. It wasn't a very specific question. It was more just
Yeah.
like, speak to this idea, and I think you did a great job. Um,
I mean, I think one of the other barriers that you mentioned is rules and the complexity of rules and the kind of fear of learning rules and getting things wrong. And I think the majority of the people I see who say, I don't have time to learn these rules, are generally people who, and I'm not talking about people who like have difficulties learning rules or
mm,
any reason why they couldn't engage with a rule set. I'm talking specifically about people who say, I don't have the time to learn a new rule set.
mm,
um, they tend to have started play with D&D and probably fifth edition, and that's a very, for all it thinks it's a rules light game, it's not. It's a very mechanically heavy game. It's got a lot of moving parts. It comes in 3 big books that are intimidating. And my answer to those people is like that's not all games.
Mm.
I think the Dragon game teaches a lot of assumptions and behaviors about how to play games that are hard to unlearn. I myself have had to unlearn a lot of them. And if you come to other games with the expectation that they're going to be like that, then yeah, you're going to bounce off them. But then you find a game like it's literally anything, like Troika,
Mm.
for example. Like it's the rules are so simple, and you can be playing in 2 minutes, and they're just very easy to learn. And I think the more games you play, it's like with board games. The more games you play, the more rules literacy you develop, and the more you recognize that a lot of games are just really using the same concepts, like either rolling dice against a target number and trying to roll higher or lower, being a core concept of so many games. And the more exposure you have to the way those things are put together, the easier it is for you to learn other systems in future, I think. Playing varied games can only make you a better gamer and a better designer. I firmly believe that.
I 100%. The going to the board game space. My partner didn't play board games before we started dating, and she's since picked up a number of games that she really likes. And exactly like you said, as we learned more, as she learned more board games, as I introduced them, she saw the analogies between games, and she understood like it helps with the learning process where you just sort of transfer. You're like, oh, I understand the idea of like building up a set of something, be it a
Mhm.
colors of cards or a certain resource and then trading that in for something. And so 100% that also applies to role playing games. The my go-to RPG for teaching people how to role play is the game End of the World. I don't know if you're
Oh yeah,
familiar with it. Yeah,
I know of it. I haven't played it, but I've heard of it.
it's very simple. Like the rules are very simple. The character creation is honestly the most fun part because you play yourself in the apocalypse. So it's very easy to role play because it's what would you do in this scenario, and I think that
Mhm.
helps people get into it. But in the character creation, you give yourself stats, and then you present your stats to the table, and the table all decides whether or not you did a good job or not by saying you're actually better at this, and then you get a boost on it, or you maybe were a little too generous to yourself on this, and you get a little bit of a drop in stats. It's an interesting
Amazing.
experience.
One
Um,
thing I've used to introduce people as well, they're not as popular now, but like in the 90s and the early 2000s, like dinner table mysteries and murder mystery parties were
mm,
super popular. And like I don't really know anyone of my generation who hasn't because either played one or isn't aware of the concept of one. And so they're a really good, like, not cultural touchstone, but a really good example to say, like, this is a role-playing game. You're pretending to be someone.
mm,
All right, cool. You could also eat a three-course meal while you're playing, but I mean, that's the same as playing a normal game anyway. You're gonna order a pizza and have snacks in
mm.
with your friends. I think everyone has experienced something that is some form of role-playing game, and everyone has played games. And it's just for some reason there's still this mystique around games, like a shield that stops people getting in. Um, and it's very easy to peel that away and find a common experience with people to say you're already playing role-playing games. Like you just maybe don't know it yet.
That's a what a cool way to sort of wrap this up is that yes, we've all been role playing this whole time and we didn't even realize it. Um, well, Chris, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I know you've got an active Kickstarter going on right now and a bunch of
Yes.
other exciting things. So I want to let you tell the folks at home, what are you up to? Where can they find you? Where can they find these things?
Yeah, God, so much going on. I've got an active Kickstarter for D36, which is probably not the thing you want if you've never touched a role-playing game in your life. It's definitely not an intro to role-playing games. But that is a book of weird, um, weird RPG content written by some of the best designers that I know. Um, we're on Kickstarter at the moment. We're trying to fund 4 issues of it. We've currently funded one. I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll get to do 2. I don't think we'll get to do all 4, but we'll see what happens. That is at bit.ly/lowercase d 36. uppercase KS. And Dice Souls comes out, I think the 1st of March I'm aiming for. That is my Souls-like game that comes in a video game case with a CD with a soundtrack on it. You can, I don't have a short URL for that, so just come and find me on Twitter and ask me about it.
I'll put all the links in the description below so that folks can find it.
Yeah, and come and say hello on Twitter. I'm at Pangalactic, which is like the drink from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Excellent, excellent. I'm very excited that I managed to snag the physical copy for each of those games that you mentioned, D36 and Dice Souls. I think there's still some Dice Souls physical
It's a
copies
limited
available,
edition of
right?
200, and I think I've sold about 100 of them so far. So yeah, you can still pick one of them up.
Yeah,
Please do.
snag one. You're gonna want to snag one. It is so cool. All right, well, thanks again everybody for taking the time to check out this first video on this new series for the Psych of RPGs, where we're going to talk about learning. The next video, we're actually going to take a deeper dive into some of the psych stuff that is going on in learning, some of the theory, see what we can take from that and use to create a better role-playing experience. So until next time, thanks everyone. Bye.